Hello, welcome to the Byrdcliffe Forum of the Woodstock Byrdcliffe Guild on Monday, October 19th, 2020. As vibrant fall color has arrived, we can think of no better artist to participate in our Woodstock Masters series than Woodstock resident Yale Epstein. I'm Doug Shear, lead of the Byrdcliffe Forum, subcommittee of the Guild's Exhibition and Programming Committee. Let me mention that comments made by today's speakers or those of you who may submit questions will not reflect those of Byrdcliffe. You may submit your questions or comments by use of the Zoom chat function, and Albert Shahinian, today's interviewer, will select some of those to read to Yale. The talk is being recorded and will be posted shortly to the Guild's YouTube channel. Albert Shahinian Fine Art is in its 22nd year as one of the region's premier galleries. Since its founding by Albert Shahinian in 1998, the gallery has mounted 4 to 6 formal exhibitions a year and has established a regional reputation for presenting artwork of outstanding quality and value. Also recognized in the programming are the diversity, thoughtful and careful presentation, and consistently high caliber of artistic expression. The gallery organizes one major annual exhibit, the Luminous Landscape, a national invitational that explores and expands the notion of contemporary landscape painting. The gallery represents only original work by mature, established living artists, both representational and non-objective. A former educator, music conductor, and sailor, Shahinian sees his gallery work as activism and necessarily a personal mission to make a difference in his immediate community. Born in Cyprus, Shahinian grew up in West Los Angeles, finishing undergraduate and graduate degrees at Occidental College before transplanting to the East Coast. His other Hudson Valley regional involvements have been solidly in the not-for-profit arena, either on payroll or as a board member, and include Hudson River Sloop Clearwater, Barrett Arts Center, the Pauline Oliveros Foundation, and Presbyterian Health Education and Welfare Association, and Bard College Hessel Museum Center for Curatorial Studies. His gallery has had a number of New York locations and satellites, including Poughkeepsie, Hudson, New Paltz, and since 2010, Rhinebeck, New York. He founded and directed the Poughkeepsie Art Museum from 2004 through 5 as a separate exhibition-based venue to host major traveling and regional exhibits, including one that featured Christo and Jean-Claude and the Gates installation in New York City. The gallery has organized and installed traveling versions of several exhibits in off-site venues, including the Desmond Fish Library in Garrison, New York, the former Museum of the Hudson Highlands, Cornwall-on-Hudson, New York, Columbia Green Community College galleries, the Cathedral Church of St. John the Divine in New York City, Yale Institute of Sacred Music Gallery at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, for a major exhibition honoring Frederick Franck. Shahinian has been representing Yale Epstein since 2009. Albert.
Thank you, Doug. We wanted to thank the Woodstock Byrdcliffe Guild for their invitation to participate in this master's program, and especially to commend the Guild for its extensive arts residencies program, which brings young artists from all over the world to Woodstock and enables the public to visit their studios and to attend the many diverse arts events sponsored by the Guild. It's very important that we both recognize that and thank you. Yale Epstein, a native of New Haven, Connecticut. Yale studied art and worked in New York City before relocating his studio and home to Woodstock in 1998. Among his teachers were Ad Reinhardt, Mark Rothko, Carl Holte, Ilya Bolotowski, Philip Perlstein, and Robert Rosenblum. Yale's had 54 solo painting and printmaking exhibitions in the United States, Italy, Switzerland, Germany. He was invited to exhibit in several international expositions, including those in Basel, Hong Kong, Florence, Krakow, Maastricht, and Sorrento. His work has been exhibited at Lincoln Center, the Park Avenue Armory, the Brooklyn Museum, Brooklyn College, Bronx Museum of Art, the Hudson River Museum, Marymount College, the National Academy of Design in New York City, New York University's Loeb Center, and the University of Hawaii. He's also completed numerous commissions in the United States, in China, and Taiwan. And his work is in the collections of over 70 major United States and international corporations, also in the public collections of the Bibliothèque Nationale in France, the Brooklyn Museum, the China International Trade Center, the Pew Charitable Trust, City of Chicago, the Library of Congress, the US State Department, the Woodstock Museum, and Yale University. His teaching career also included Brooklyn College, the Brooklyn Museum, Pratt Institute, and the School of Visual Arts in New York City. He was selected for a residency at the Visiting Artist Scholar Program at the American Academy in Rome, Italy, and is also a grants recipient from the Pollock Krasner Foundation for Contemporary Arts. Take it, Yale.
Wow. We're being overwhelmed with credentials here, but everyone. Anyway, I want to just throw out a thanks to Judy Kerman, because I was determined that this not be a talking heads issue here, and that we would show enough material to amuse the people or otherwise. And she promised me that with a little signal from me, magic can happen and images will appear. I'm impressed by that. Anyway, where do you want to begin?
I want to begin. I just want to say that I met you in 1998. You visited a gallery I was running in Rhinebeck.
Yeah.
I remember a guy with bushy beard, wild hair, very enthusiastic and supportive and complimentary. And that encouragement has stuck with me all these years. Even though our professional relationship only began in 2006, when you sent me material and a proposal for an exhibition, which eventually was our first major show, Inscriptions to the Eloquent Brush, in 2009 in our former gallery up in Hudson. And since then, we've had 3 major solo exhibitions of Yale's, as well as a number of group exhibitions. And the exhibit Confluences, which was scheduled for this June, had to be postponed due to the pandemic, and we're working on rescheduling that. I think that's a great segue to ask you, in these strange times, Yale, how's this pandemic and the possible quarantining affected you?
Immensely, like everybody else, it affected me personally. It's a very strange times in which it's like a veil over conversation, over socializing, and like the 2 main topics that are floating in the air, politics and COVID, are just making for a very kind of downtime. So that's personal. Professional, as opposed to gallery work, a lot of things were postponed just at that time. There were 4 or 5 things happening at the same time. The show you mentioned, which involved a lot of preparation and photographs and the publishing of the book, things we'll talk about specifically later, that was postponed. A related show, which is really a fundraiser for the WAM, involving the same 2 books we're going to talk about, the book signing and showing the work there, the Saturday, Saturday talks, that was postponed. There was a show I was part of in my Miami gallery that closed. And the latest was the gallery from Milan, who was going to show at Art Basel in Miami next month, in December. They canceled out in September. He was going to show four of those small pieces. Maybe there was some more, but everything was like canceled. That was professionally. Yeah. In the studio itself, well, I had more time. And actually, I worked, you might say, entirely in the last few months on a project that I had postponed for a long time, which we can talk about. But
yeah, let me interrupt. I was curious, before we get on to the new studio work, I wanted to maybe talk about the confluences, because it was a project
that's
still in the works. Can you describe what you had in mind with this project?
Okay. So these are two of the books that we're going to be the subject of both Albert's show and the thing at the WAM, a few other things. The one on the right is called Confluences. It's an idea, a concept that do we talk about that now? I guess.
Sure,
no?
we can, yeah.
Okay, and the other one is a book on design.
Yeah.
So Judy, next. Okay, so the idea of confluences is a really simple one, but it's in every one of our lives. It's simply that you're not where you are or doing what you're doing just kind of unilaterally. There's many different factors that put you there. Just think about it. Anything you do is because of many factors. The confluence of many factors. So here's a handsome young man that's walking by a mural in Miami. He didn't dress that morning to walk by that mural and just have that thing happen where there's just a perfect picture. The confluence. He was there, that was there, I was there. So that's in one image. The book consists of several of these. Next. Here's a woman in a museum in Amsterdam. She happened to dress that morning in the same kind of color scheme as the seat in the lobby and the chairs behind her. And this is a candid picture of her taking a candid picture, but it's a confluence of factors which are one of the reasons a photograph can be successful. Next. Here's kind of inappropriate, this woman there, the cowboy, you know, a famous name, and she's not a famous lady, but they're kind of in confluence. Next. This is a kind of subtle one. I find it really interesting, you know, a sculpture of that nature, the St. Patrick's and the modern building. This might say something almost philosophically or religiously or spiritually. Next. Okay, so a good part of the book deals with this kind of thing, where on the same page, you'll find two images. They're taken, and the left one is in Miami 10 years ago, and the right one is in India just last year, but they both have a confluence. There's something about, I don't know, machismo, different versions of malehood on the same page in the book, you see. So there's that effect of confluence. Next. Totally different worlds, but something about the imagery, the color, the whatever it is a confluence. So the idea was that I had to go into my archive of thousands of photographs and find the one on the right that was taken in New York 10 years ago, and the one on the left was taken in Albert's gallery, you know, 3 years ago, and marry them. So you can imagine the time that takes to go through thousands of photographs to find which ones would look good together on a page and offer this idea of confluence. it was quite a task. So it was years in the making. Next. Young guys on their vehicles. India, Miami. Next. Mansions by the sea, Miami, Varanasi. And when you see these large on the page in the book, and it's a very large book, they really speak to one another in this very interesting dialogue. Again, a confluence. Next. Varanasi again on the bottom. New York City from a high penthouse apartment overlooking Lincoln Center, actually. And they're both cities, kind of crowded. The same but different, confluence. Next. Let's call this Commerce. On the right, Commerce on Fifth Avenue. On the left, Commerce in Kerala in southern India. Next. Wash, drying, wealth, and non-wealth brought together on a page. Next. So this is interesting, where at the bottom is a very fancy apartment, and part of it, see those pillows, they're trying to, despite the opulence of the apartment, they're trying to give you the feeling, or visitors the feeling of kind of folksy, you know. And the top is something we encountered, Deborah and I, on a hike in the mountains of Turkey. You know, the real thing. Folksy, same colors, so a confluence. Next. The card on the bottom, you may recognize, it's outside the Met, usually on Fifth Avenue, and there's a cart in southern Italy, southern India. Is that the end? I think, no? Is that the last one? I'm not counting. Okay. So that was the idea of there's the book 2, cover of the book. So it's photographs that I found are all around everywhere, in which I focused in on the design element of what I was photographing. Next. Next. Here too, the photographs were taken at different times in different places. Next. Just laying out the pages creates a design event. Next. These are actually 4 different photographs. So next. So this is shows you many examples, one of many examples of scale playing a role, because the middle photograph, those purples are, it's Tyvek just piled up on a construction site. But as you look at this spread of 2 pages, it makes quite a striking design. I came to respect bookmaking, the creating of interesting books much more than I had anticipated. It was really both a struggle, fun, and a very satisfying experience, because these are all taken at different places and different times, and they're putting them together. Next. Next. So this is kind of a statement of busyness of different kinds. They're all photographs. By the way, none of these I don't use It doesn't mean I'm downplaying it, but I don't use Photoshop. I just make sure the photograph that was in front of me is intact and correctly exposed, but I don't add anything to anything. So that it is what you see. Is that the last one?
Oh,
Huh?
when I get to the last one, I'll go back to you. I'm counting.
Oh, you still have more?
Not on that book.
Okay, good. Okay, so we're finished with that.
So Yale, you've had a lot of time to do some thinking and some redirection with new work. And I'm very familiar with your work over the years. But this most recent work you've been working on, you sort of refer to as the COVID work.
Yeah.
It's very different. Can we see some of this work and explain how this fits into where you're going or have been planning to go for a few years?
Okay. I guess we have to go back in order to understand what this project is. This is a project that I've been putting off for 3 years. Let's see where it started. So it starts, unfortunately, with fire. It's really odd. Out of the like 4 artists that I saw that were in this series from Byrdcliffe, I'm the second one. That's 50% that had a fire. You know, Melinda had several years ago in Chicago. We had one very recently. And okay, so this is not going to be maudlin, I assure you. It's to make a point. Do you see the white sheets on the bottom? They're art, strewn all over the place after the fire. Okay, next. This is a shot of this part of the studio, and you can see some of the paintings, you know, leaning and burned. On the left side middle is just a corner of 2 very large map cases, map files. You can just see the corner of them. But in them, where that's 10, it's a double tier, which is 10 drawers. So there must have been, you know, 30 to a drawer, so like 300 pieces were in there. Parts of those were all burned and soaked by the firemen. But our excavator, next please, was the first angel. Oh, well, this is an example of notebooks that I lost. Okay, next. Okay, this is an example of something that was not on paper and how it looks partially burned. I happen to think it looks better now. Next. Okay, so here's what happened. Doug Ostrander was my first angel. He'd get up off his excavator. They were, you know, cleaning up the mess, and every time he saw papers, he put them in a pile. He threw them off into the pile, walked them over into the pile, and we ended up with hundreds of papers. Next. My next saving angel. I think she's not tuned in yet here, but probably will see this. Sylvia, you know, Wolf Levitan. For 2 weeks, we set up a tent. We rescued these papers. She worked every day, rain or shine. Next. We put them on blotters. By the way, many of these blotters, most of them were supplied by Jim Cox. So I appreciated everybody's help. We put them together, we weighted them down, we dried them out. Next, I'm not sure what's next. Next. Oh, but I didn't want to end on a low note. So this is my new studio, which Albert is sitting in now. So all's well that ends well. But next, okay, so I said I'm going back into history. This is amazing. And I even made a paper here with a timeline because you wouldn't believe this. So there's the fire on, I believe it was the 16th of April. No, it was the 11th of April. Deborah helped me out on this timeline because I really didn't understand it, but now I have it down. So the show is supposed to go up. If you look at that poster, the 30th of April was supposed to be the opening and the closing the 2nd of June. I had a package out for this show of that work that you see there. That was out for to be picked up by the trucker, DHL, on April 13th. It's a week after the fire. It was going to be delivered to Milan for a show. This is in, the gallery has a subsidiary seasonally in Capri. And the opening was for the 30th. And I had no work because that package I had was in the house. It was burned. That freaking show was burned. So Albert will remember this. I didn't have time to, mourn what was happening. I had to get the work out. Remember, Albert? I ran over to you and you had a bunch of things there. You brought me over to your framer to do the mats because I had to send them. I was trying to just reproduce, work for that show to get it where I could. So we got a bunch of them from Albert. There was a show at the time at Sneha's gallery, Woodstock framing, but she had the show up at that time. In fact, the opening was April 16th, and it was like 3 days after the fire. So I remember everybody talking about the fire at the opening, and I wanted to talk about the work. But she had stored, in addition to what was up on the walls, she had stored in her storeroom, I think it was 8 pieces. So we added that to Albert's pieces, put them in a new package, and shipped them off like express to resuscitate that show that was planned in Italy. They had all the frames made. We were just sending the material matted. So the last part of it, they changed the timing of that show. So instead of an opening, they had what we'd call a soft opening. Now remember, we don't have passports. They were burned. We don't have records of any of the flights or the hotels where we were going to stay in Naples. We had nothing. We had to go to Stanford to get emergency passports. And we got, the plan was to have a closing party instead of an opening party. That was the accommodation. But I wanted to show you this last 2 slides, which will be quite meaningful. Number 10 there is the work finally on the walls that we saw the last day of the show. And the last one, number 11, is it was such a big deal at the closing party that we just made by the skin of our teeth that the mayor of Capri, that lady is there. There was music and it was just amazing. So this is the portfolio of work that was shown in that show. So this is the work which is, photographed on artwork directly. Next. These are small works, I think. Yeah, these are small works. Next. Next. Well, here's a calligraphic rendition of it. Next. Next. So these are the things that were in that show in Capri. Okay, next. Next.
You used some of this because I saw some of the work that you were producing during the pandemic, and they were based on the
Let's do that.
rescued, and you used the original
Okay, let me,
Work on paper to flip over that paper and
okay. So what the project that I call the COVID project that I was preparing for since the fire was I cut all the remaining parts that were not burned or not soaked to all of the uniform size. They were all dry. They're beautiful paper, 300-pound weight Arches cover, which printmakers would know. It's incredible paper. It went through the fire and soaking. And I cut it out at a size that was about 14 by 17. So I have now about 60 sheets of 14 by 17, of which one side has part of the old work, okay? I turned it over, which was blank, and I did all the new works during the COVID time on this paper on the other side. So it's repurposed and it has a kind of emotional meaning for me. And I finally got to do about 40 of them, which we'll see some now. Here's the back and here's the front, just to show you. So this is a new work. Each one of them has a remnant of a burned work on the back. Remember now, each one of these pieces is the same size as the next. They're like, as I said, they're all recycled, going all the way back to the fire. These are people who work from the fire. The back of them are with different images from the fire. The front of them is what you see now. Next. All different kinds of works, but the same size. Next. And on the same recycled works. It's all brand new work.
Are they print?
No, they're all with various materials. Really detailed work. I mean, nobody bothered me in the studio. We had no places to go. I really worked from day to night. They're all different materials I've used. So what's behind all these is really the same thing that's behind most artists' work, and that is this kind of battle between something that's structured, that you're planning, and then allowing whatever happens to happen. So there's that balance between planning and serendipity on all of these. So there's a structure to them, but yet there's a freedom to them. I had a lot of help in using different twigs and materials to make these things. So if you could show me on the screen, I have some samples of some things. Okay, so for example, there's plenty of these twigs around. I've got, several of them. Imagine putting this in ink. There you go. What would you get if you made a line with this in ink, in Sumi ink? And then there's others that intentionally I look for twigs that are run over by cars. You can see the ink on them. I'll even use for texture pine cones, and even, pine cones of different, like this will make a different mark than this. I dip these in the ink. So the COVID work, in another nutshell, is done with free flowing materials and also with the same one, fine Sumi brushes, okay? So I just spent a lot of time learning what materials can do, and got much out of feeling I was working with this repurposed.
So Yale, I want to come to an end with this part. Questions if we have it, but I think I'm curious to know what you see as the primary issues that you struggle with in your work, and also how these translate to the new work that you're doing.
Well, okay. The issues I have to answer in two ways. One is a common issue that all artists have, and that is like, it's a balance between what I had mentioned, what you plan, you plan to go to the store or take a trip or something, and all the time something's going to happen. So there's a balance between those things in the work itself, which is like most artists. Mm-hmm. Second would be that in every work, I am learning how to use materials that I thought I mastered better. I'm spending a lot of time learning what the materials can do, and the end result of that is just not to have a, delve into the processes, but it's to force those materials, which are obdurate for the most part, to align my ideas and intentions with those processes. It takes a lot of focus and time. So those are generally what a lot of artists have in common. Specifically, it's difficult to answer because I work in so many diverse ideas that the issues I'm dealing with in each group of works is relevant to those specific ideas. So I'm not begging the question, but it's difficult without, if you show me an image, I can tell you what I was dealing with there. But I can say that all of the work, okay, I'll put it this way, yeah, is about itself. There's no narrative, there's no story. It's largely about itself in that frame that I gave it to exist. I don't mean this in a magical, artsy, talky way, but in a real simple way. And here it is. Any line, shape, color, symbol that you put on a page and you place it in a certain position in relation to other elements and create paths for the eyes, everything that you learned in art school. All of these, regardless of the subject, whether it's a landscape or a person or whatever, or it's just what we call an abstraction or non-objective art, what's in your visual field is going to naturally evoke an emotional aesthetic response. Just the lines themselves, the shapes themselves. And anyone who looks at art in museums and galleries knows what I'm talking about. So the bottom line is what you bring to what you've been looking at all your life. If you never saw a painting before or you saw a million paintings before, it's going to make a difference in how you feel about what you see in front of you. So the more you bring to the work, the more you're going to get a pure visual experience. And looking at other works is only one way of sensitizing yourself to a visual experience. It's just looking at everything else in nature does too.
So one of these more practical parts of this might be you're experimenting with materials. So in one of these new pieces, or pick anything that we've seen over the last 5 or 6 years, what elements are you using to create these things besides the physical things that you've looked at in terms of types of inks, different kinds of paint? I know you did a lot with some gouaches. It seems like you're always experimenting with the actual material to create something.
Yeah, well, I'm just keep learning how to use different materials, which I thought I knew how to use in one way, and finding other ways to use them. So that goes without saying. It's what I said before.
So we haven't talked much about the photography in your work, since more recently you've begun to show photography as an end rather than something you've been doing. One of my favorite shows we did was a photo collage show, which was very different from, on the surface from things that you did.
Mm-hmm.
Yet there is that consistent Epstein, not only quality, the craft, the quality, but a kind of artistic sensibility that speaks. Is that something you think is just innate in your way of creating a perception of what you want, or where do you arrive at that?
I can't answer that really. Whatever happens, happens. but I can tell you about how photography entered into the picture, if
Yeah.
you'd like. There's just 4 of them. Okay, so this was the show. Okay, I can tell you a little bit about this one, then I can tell you how and really answer your question if there's time about how I got into photography, which is interesting. So these were not, you look at this now and you assume that these were put together with Photoshop. No, the difference is I printed up small copies of all these images that I got from different places and physically pasted them down, glued them down. So you might ask, what's the difference? Well, the difference is they're on that Arches paper. If you ran your finger over them, you would feel the edges. And if you saw them in person, you would see the tiny shadows because they are physically put together pieces of paper. Next. So again, the idea of bringing things together. These are 3 different photographs, but put in different contexts, they become something different. You know, they're each one of them are photographs of by themselves. Next. Can't see this one too much. It's a funny one. Next. Okay, this was a different show, not at Albert's, but you get a sense of the range of what I did with that concept. I mean, this lady there is a sculpture in the Metropolitan Museum. This is from a shrine in Sufi shrine in Italy. This is something rather in India. I keep saying Italy, and this is some statue of a goddess. And anyway, they're all different from different places, culled and put into a new form and glued on here by hand, so that you actually see them. So that's those. But okay, is there time for me to tell you how I got into photography? Entered into this. I don't know how the time is going.
Yeah, we have a few minutes left.
Okay, so simply it was in graduate school at Brooklyn College. I had a wonderful teacher, Walter Rosenblum. He was a famous photographer at the time. And in graduate school, I was his assistant, studio assistant in the darkroom. Got my camera, worked, and throughout all my years, which are a lot by now, I've taken photographs continuously, especially on our many trips. When we decided we wouldn't want to be here anymore in the winters and went to Florida 13 years ago, I immediately thought, well, across from where we live, there's offices, and there's a corner office that I would set up as a studio and have it right across the street. And then I woke up one morning before I was signed a lease and I said, oh, no way. My studio's, as you know, Albert, you're sitting in one, is like a, I don't know, a chemistry lab. You know, at this point, I didn't want to set up an entire new studio. I wasn't going to start buying paints again. And so I nixed that and set aside a place in our apartment and bought a nice printer, got a new camera, because Miami is a mecca for photographers. And that's how that started to get built up. And then when I came back here, I started accumulating a vast library of photographs and printing them, and shows came and different focuses for different shows. So that's generally.
So there's one more thing that's really interesting to me is a lot of calligraphic motifs in your work. And this starts a while ago, you know, and has very different threads, but it adds a really wonderful quality to the work. Where did that inspiration come from?
Well, I guess the genesis of that is really travel to places in which the written language was a hell of a lot more interesting than ours visually. And I say this with due respect to all the type designers. We in our travels, like, you know, I would take photographs constantly, among other things, of signs in Turkey and in China, Vietnam, whatever, where they were kind of either pictographic languages or just this wonderful flowing script. I mean, there I was, taking a picture, and Deborah's running ahead, hurry up, what's that big? And it turns out that the picture I'm taking of is, this way to the toilets. But to me, it was a beautiful script that I was interested in. So I'm distinctly not interested in the meaning of these words. My favorite, practically. By the way, a couple of these were saved because they belong to somebody. Susan Ronner here, which you might know. This is Sylvia, again, has that one in her house, apartment. This is Holly Gersh owns that one. So in a way, it goes back to saving work by having them out there. So they're just these. These last few are like unique ones. People haven't seen them.
I've not seen these yet.
Okay, this is brand new.
Beautiful.
Now you notice this doesn't have that kind of an Oriental thing to it. It's on handmade paper and it's just squiggly lines. So the answer to the point is that I'm just enamored with the dance of the lines that these languages, visual languages have. But the important thing is that I'm not just using them as a gimmick. Where normally you think of line, form, shape, all the things you consider as elements of art. This is an element of art for me, and I'll use it in an appropriate way where it makes the picture work and feel right.
Right.
So, while I was thinking there's a story that might be interesting to some people, because it gives a sense of, I don't know, the kind of art life I was living in New York before I came up here to Woodstock. So this goes back to 1970s. I was teaching at the time. I was living in what is now called fashionable Tribeca. At the time, it was Washington Market. And you could actually park in the streets, and there were no people but a few artists in lofts around, and some cheese storage facilities, and cobblestone streets, and the first precinct horse division would come by every night at 4 o'clock in the morning and clopping around the streets. It was just kind of a homey place, but at the same time, a lot of artists in that area. So one of my neighbors, loft neighbors, Cesar Paternostro, who's quite well-known South American artist, wrote several books and is in very good galleries. So he was collaborating with someone in writing this book about the Aztec sculptures and how they relate to minimal art. And she was helping him, I guess, translate. He's from Argentina. So she was up at the loft with him, saw my work many times, twice or so. So it's about 9 o'clock at night. I'm supposed to be teaching the next day. I taught 3 days a week, and that was the days that I was teaching. I was ready to kind of wrap up. And the telephone call comes, and she says, Yale, is there anything wrong with Caesar? I said, what? She said, we had an appointment with him. I called him, nobody's answering. At that time, there was no cell phone, so if you didn't answer, you weren't home. I said, well, something must be wrong with your schedule, because I know he's back in Argentina taking care of some kind of divorce issue. So there's silence and then mumbling or something. She says, Yale, I'm with someone from Europe, and we were supposed to stop at Caesar's to talk about a printing project, and I was going to take him to the airport directly from there. We're down at Bubba's, which is a cafe on the corner, which is, I think, subsequently became a fancy restaurant. But anyway, can we come up? I said, you give me 5 minutes, come up, So he come up, and he's looking at work, a very nice, distinguished looking guy. And he was interested in my proof printing at press and works that I had done with monoprinting. And then I showed him these pastels I was working on at the time. They're very large paper. Printers would know this paper, printmakers. Arches cover, it's 47¼ inches long and very heavy paper and beautiful pastels. And his eyes lit up. And strangely, the conversation started to change from what I was telling him. On his part, there was this pronoun he was using, we. We could do this or we could do that. Subsequently, of course, I found out that this was the most prominent printmaking operation in Europe, in Stuttgart. Editions Domberger. His father had been the one who made serigraph, silkscreen, a fine art medium. His father was friends of Willy Baumeister and Joseph Albers and printed with them. And now he has very prominent, most of the prominent artists in the United States and in Europe who print editions with him. People you might know, I mean, even Milton Glaser from our area did many of his prints with him, and Richard Estes. In any case, he was interested in working with me in publishing the prints. So what was very important in my career happened right that night, because he had a relationship with Pace Editions, a very lovely person there, Karen McCready, who subsequently went to be the director of Crown Point Press in New York, which again, people would be familiar with. But she was there for 2 years, and for 2 years that I was there with her, she was sewing these prints. And because of that, there was a kind of a credential that I could go elsewhere, and one thing led to another, and a lot of professional advancement came just because of that little story that Caesar was out of town and I was there, and this lady came to visit. I'll show you some of the prints now that we did with Domberger. So this is the kind of thing, and it was, as you can see, closer to my earlier work that was influenced by my earlier interest in Rothko, etc. Next, please. These are beautiful, luminous, large prints. Oh, the funny thing here is I went there for 9 years, late 70s through the 80s, every December for about 10 days. And we did editions there in Stuttgart. And the master printer, his name was Gepke or something, he was speaking to me in German. I was speaking to him in Yiddish, and he didn't know. It was just an inflection I put on the Yiddish, but we communicated for 10 years and produced these prints. Next, please. So these are very large, and these are the ones that were marketed through Pace, and then later many other galleries. In fact, there were like 3 or 4 galleries right on 57th Street at the same time. People may remember these galleries: Shirley Reese, Associate American Artists, Corporate Art Directions with Betty Levin. Anyway, names are just names at this point. Let's continue looking. Next. So there are many, many screens that I did during that week that I was there every year to get this kind of effect. Next, please. So the originals that these came from, that I tried to emulate or used as models, were pastels. Next, please. This is a little more aggressive one. That may be the end, is that right? Okay, so that's a little story to go along with the little portfolio. Hope you enjoyed it. So I guess since we're running out of time, I thought it might be interesting and maybe useful in a way to look at just one more portfolio. So we can touch on an issue that many artists deal with, and that's working within limits or restrictions as opposed to kind of flying freely and working with whatever happens on the canvas. I guess actually both are perfectly feasible, but limitations do challenge me. They challenge me more than they restrict me. I need to find different, sometimes surprising ways to get the results I'm looking for, or to actually, discover new pathways into myself in relation to the work. So this portfolio shows a severe restriction and how I worked with it. So we'll see small works now. Okay, so this is a show of all works which were created during a period in which I was out of my studio here for almost 2 years. And because of the severe restrictions in space, I worked much smaller than usual. So in a much smaller format, I created a large body of works using different kinds of media. Some I had used before and used them in different ways. And I used different orientations, but most importantly, many kinds of different ideas evolved in the course of working because I was working with that restriction. So in this one, you see, this was a show at Albert's. There's there are minimal shapes in this group, but some are with lots of texture. Some of them were with no texture. And the one you're seeing now, you might notice I'm using my old calligraphic library of images. Next. So I also produced some that weren't in the show, never seen by anyone. This is an interesting example. Next. Subsequently, from those small works, I created large paintings. So it worked both ways. This was a group that was shown this way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 large paintings in relation to each other. But because they weren't matted, as the small ones were, you'll notice things begin to happen, relationships that weren't there in the small ones, like those 3 triangles in the middle. So the restrictions here led to a whole different body of work. Next, please. Later on, I started to combine the geometrics with sort of serendipitous markings. And they created interesting details. Next. Now this was geometric, which was extreme details, which I never would have done probably in a larger painting. So it's detail upon detail. Next. This is an example of something we spoke about before, and that was there is structure here, there's planning here, but there's also the looseness in those scribbles. So I've combined both in the same image, the idea of structure and serendipitous happenings or doing things that the painting requires at the moment. Next. Also, in terms of a planned idea, there are many of these images that were based on the grid, but as this one is, But you can see it kind of plays with the idea of a grid. So using a grid, but going off it in certain interesting ways. Next. This certainly does. So behind all that stuff, there is a strict grid formulation. And the next one, the last one, I just wanted you to see that I tried doing the calligraphy work and some playful lines and geometric lines, very, very small scale on these. In fact, I had to use a microscopic glass to accomplish some of this. So I thought this might be an interesting portfolio for you to see at the end.